Why the woman who stops explaining is the most dangerous. Carl Jung, most women spend years explaining themselves, softening the blow of their truths, translating their intuition into logic, and pleading for their boundaries to be seen as reasonable. They exhaust their voices trying to make their soul feel safe in a world that only listens to noise, not depth. But there comes a moment quiet, cold, and irreversible when she stops, and that silence is not compliance. It's a withdrawal of energy, a sacred severance. It is, in Jungian terms, the moment her animus awakens, and the mask of the pleasing feminine disintegrates into smoke. When a woman stops explaining, she steps out of the archetype of the caretaker and enters the sovereign domain of the self. She is no longer the nurturer of fragile egos. She is no longer the translator of unspeakable instincts. She has touched the raw edge of her shadow and let it burn away the parts of her that once begged for understanding. And this metamorphosis is dangerous, because it reveals the one thing the world fears. A woman no longer seeking permission to be whole. This is not the silence of submission. This is the silence of self-possession. When she stops explaining, she detaches from the cycle of projection. She no longer needs to be seen as reasonable to have worth. She no longer needs to be understood to be real. Her inner masculine the-archetypal king within rises, not to conquer others, but to defend her inner world from invasion. She has integrated the disowned aspects of herself, the anger, the grief, the terror, the erotic power. And in doing so, she becomes unknowable to those who only valued her when she was digestible. You can see it in her eyes. Before, they searched for comprehension, for recognition, for some glimmer of reciprocity. Now, they see through the veil. They pierce illusion. They do not beg, they witness. This is the moment when a man who once ignored her voice suddenly fears her gaze. He senses something primal has shifted. No tantrum, no lecture, just distance and the echo of what he never tried to understand. Because the feminine that stops explaining no longer plays in the sandbox of the wounded boy. She leaves it behind, like a forgotten toy. Jung called it the individuation process, the sacred path of becoming whole. But what he knew, and what many forget, is that for the feminine soul, individuation often begins with heartbreak. A betrayal not just by others, but by the self. She realizes she's been complicit in her own silencing. She was trained to make excuses for disrespect, to offer context for cruelty, to be endlessly understanding in the face of psychological immaturity. She sees now that every explanation she gave was a negotiation with her own abandonment wound. Every word was a survival tactic, but survival is not sovereignty. So she stops, and in that stopping, 1,000 years of inherited silence transforms into power, because now, her words are no longer wasted. Her voice returns home, to the temple of her own being. She no longer defends her worth, she embodies it. She no longer teaches grown men how to treat her, she removes herself. Not with rage, but with reverence. For her time, for her nervous system, for the child within her who spent too long performing peace while suffocating in chaos. You must understand, this woman is not cold. She is clear. She is not cruel. She is conscious. She is not detached from emotion. She is detached from manipulation. The drama that once fed on her empathy now finds nothing to devour, because she is no longer playing the role of the understanding woman. That role has been retired, burned, buried. In its place stands the mystic, the warrior, the queen, the woman who is finally, fully, inwardly aligned. And that is terrifying to those who knew her only when she was fragmented, who loved her for her wounds but not her wisdom, who were magnetized by her chaos but intimidated by her calm. Now they feel the void where her emotional labor used to be. They call it coldness, but it is actually warmth redirected inward. She no longer bleeds to keep others warm. Her love is not gone, it has been sanctified. And for the man who once believed he could take without consequence, explain away his inconsistency, or mistake her forgiveness for weakness, her silence is now his reckoning. Because the woman who stops explaining has nothing left to give but the truth. And the truth, when delivered without apology, is a sword. There is a primal shift that occurs in the psyche when a woman stops justifying her presence. Her nervous system, once stretched thin by endless emotional acrobatics, begins to stabilize. No longer does she anxiously search for the right way to say how she feels, or calibrate her truths to match the emotional tolerance of the room. She is no longer an interpreter of chaos or an ambassador for her own pain. Instead, she becomes the observer, detached, unbothered, and devastatingly clear. This clarity is not the product of bitterness. It is the outcome of awakening. The woman who stops explaining has begun the descent into her own underworld. Like Inanna stripping away her layers in the Sumerian myth, she sheds her people-pleasing, her desire to be chosen, her reflex to over-accommodate with each layer discarded. She reclaims a piece of her soul. This descent is not comfortable. It is a crucifixion of identity, the death of who she was trained to be. But as Jung taught, the shadow is not evil, it is simply unlived potential. And this woman, in her silence, is beginning to live what was once buried. No longer will she dilute her truth for fragile egos. No longer will she explain why her no is valid. No longer will she wait for her discomfort to be seen as real. She knows now that the moment she begins explaining, she is betraying herself. She sees it as a transaction she can no longer afford, because each explanation is an energy leak, each justification a quiet bleed out of her power, and she has bled enough. Men who once knew her as agreeable may not recognize her anymore. The man who grew accustomed to her softness as submission now feels lost in her silence. He may attempt to provoke, to re-engage her in the familiar dance, create confusion, cast doubt, play the victim. But she no longer responds. Because what was once a conversation is now a mirror, and he cannot manipulate what he cannot access. Her silence forces him into the echo chamber of his own shadow. She does not punish, she simply leaves. This is the danger of a woman who stops explaining. She becomes psychologically unavailable to those who operate in distortion. She is no longer seduced by emotional chaos or trapped in the matrix of potential. She does not believe in what could be if only she tries harder. She sees what isn't. That vision sets her free. Not because she has given up, but because she has woken up. An awakening, by its nature, is irreversible. Do you understand the weight of this transformation? It's not just about a woman walking away from a man. It's about a woman walking back into herself, reclaiming the inner temple, where her voice echoes like thunder, not in a plea, but in power. She no longer needs to explain why she's intuitive, sensitive, fierce, contradictory. She is a symphony of complexity, and she no longer breaks it down into palatable pieces for the emotionally illiterate. And yes, some will call her cold, some will say she's changed. Some will accuse her of having no heart. But they're wrong. She has the same heart, only now it beats for her. Her compassion is not gone, it has evolved. Her empathy is no longer for the sake of harmony, it's for the sake of truth. She is kind, but not compliant. She is soft, but not submissive. And above all, she is sovereign. Men who wish to approach her now must come with clean hands and clear eyes. Not perfection, but presence. Not games, but ground. Because the woman who stops explaining has no time for projection. She will not mother a man's inner child while silencing her own. She will not carry the weight of his unprocessed shame just to maintain a bond. If he cannot hold himself, he cannot hold her. There is a quiet, almost holy rage in her calm now. Not the rage of destruction, but the rage of resurrection. The sacred fire that burns through illusion and lights the path toward the authentic self. Her silence is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of boundaries. And in a world that profits off of female exhaustion, her refusal to explain is an act of spiritual rebellion. This woman has become dangerous not because she seeks power over others, but because she has retrieved the power she once gave away freely. Her presence no longer begs. It commands not through force, but through frequency. She is no longer chasing clarity from others. She is the clarity. And in that truth, she becomes untouchable. Her presence, once shaped to accommodate others, now exists on its own terms. She walks into a room, and the energy shifts not because she demands attention, but because she no longer needs it. That is the paradox of power. When a woman detaches from external validation, she becomes magnetic. Not in the way of performance, but in the way of truth. She no longer plays roles. She embodies her essence. And that essence, unfiltered and unapologetic, terrifies those who relied on her confusion to stay comfortable. This woman has touched the center of her own being, and it has changed everything. She has stopped asking, "Am I too much?" and started wondering why others were so little. She no longer carries the weight of unspoken expectations, no longer stretches herself into unnatural shapes just to be loved. She is done performing emotional labor for those who refuse to grow. This is not cruelty. This is evolution. And for those who have never met a woman in her full integrity, it feels like punishment. The ones who are accustomed to her over-explaining now feel abandoned. But she has not abandoned anyone, she has simply stopped abandoning herself. That's what her silence means. She has called her energy back. She has reclaimed the parts of her soul that were outsourced to people who never earned them. And now, with every breath, she moves from alignment, not approval. She no longer fights to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding her. That war is over. She has surrendered not in defeat, but in divine refusal. She refuses to be a teacher to men who do not want to learn. She refuses to beg for intimacy, while carrying the burden of emotional maturity for two. She refuses to explain the sacred, the intuitive, the unspoken, because those things do not belong in the language of logic. They belong in energy. And if a man cannot feel her, he is not meant for her. What she has now is presence. Deep, grounded, somatic presence. You can feel it in the way she breathes, in the way she listens without reacting, in the way she says no without offering a 20-minute speech to make it easier to swallow. Her no is enough. Her boundary is not a debate. Her truth is not a thesis to be defended, it is a frequency to be honored. Carl Jung spoke of the animus in women, the inner masculine who, once matured, protects her psychic space. This woman has met her animus. He does not dominate her, he does not drown her feminine flow. He stands guard. He ensures that what enters her field is aligned. He turns her silence into a sword and her gaze into a mirror. And through this integration, she becomes terrifying to the unconscious man, because she sees through him, not in judgment, but in clarity. She no longer plays therapist, healer, or muse to the wounded masculine. She has retired from the role of being someone's awakening. If he wishes to meet her, he must meet himself first. That is the standard now, because she has learned that great cause that love, without self-respect, is self-destruction. She will not destroy herself for anyone again. Some will call her intimidating, too much, too intense. They will try to pathologize her power, diagnose her independence, label her detachment as dysfunction. But beneath those labels is fear, the fear of a woman who cannot be controlled through guilt, who cannot be silenced with shame, who cannot be seduced by potential. She has become immune to emotional manipulation, and that immunity is dangerous to those who once thrived on her doubt. If you are a man, and you meet this woman, do not try to decipher her like a riddle. Do not try to tame her, or rescue her, or reduce her complexity into a checklist. Stand still, get honest, look within, because she is not interested in your charm. She is interested in your shadow. She wants to see if you've met it. She wants to know if you've bled for your truth, if you've held yourself in your own nights of silence, if you've learned to sit with the pain you once projected onto others. If not, do not approach, because her energy will collapse every facade. Her presence will unearth every unhealed part of you. Her silence will reveal who you really are beneath the words. She is not dangerous because she wounds. She is dangerous because she awakens. To love a woman who has stopped explaining is to walk into the fire of your own becoming. She will not hand you a map. She will not offer endless grace while you fumble with your patterns. She has already done that. For years, she bent herself backwards to be understood. She studied your silences, translated your projections, absorbed your inconsistencies. But now, she watches, detached, sovereign, not cold consecrated. Her withdrawal is not punishment, it is discernment. Her energy is no longer a public resource. It is sacred currency, and only those who match its frequency will ever touch it. She is not trying to be loved anymore. She is simply being, and that being radiates something both terrifying and holy. A woman who belongs to herself. She has looked into the abyss of her own conditioning. The wounds from her father's absence, the manipulations of culture, the early betrayals that taught her to over-explain, overfunction, overfeel. She has sat with these ghosts in silence, not to banish them but to understand them. And now, they no longer run her. She is not free from her shadow, she is free with it. Integrated, alive, whole. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This woman has made the unconscious conscious. She has traced her pain to its roots. She has questioned her need to be palatable. She has confronted the buried terror that says, if I am not agreeable, I will be abandoned. And she has buried that lie in the earth where it belongs. No more explaining her boundaries. No more negotiating her value. No more performing softness for men who equate power with threat. She is not here to make you comfortable. She is here to be true, and that truth has edges. It does not shrink in the presence of fragile egos. It does not dim to maintain harmony. It is bold, it is sharp, it is sovereign. You may think you want her until you realize what she requires. Not money, not perfection, not performance, presence, depth, a nervous system that doesn't flinch at her fire. She requires a man who can hold her chaos without needing to control it. A man who has met his own grief, faced his own rage, surrendered his own masks. Because if you haven't faced yourself, you will try to possess her. You will try to dissect her mystery. You will call her confusing, because she does not mirror your delusions. But she will not be confused. She will simply leave. There is no spectacle in her leaving. No tears, no begging, no final appeal. Just distance. Icy, divine, irreversible distance. And in that distance, you will meet what you tried to avoid. Your emptiness. The parts of you she once filled with her explaining, her compassion, her need to be enough. Without her emotional labor, your soul will echo, and you may wonder, why didn't she fight for me? But that's the point. She did fight for years. With her voice, with her patience, with her love. You just never saw it because she delivered it gently. You mistook softness for surrender. You mistook her empathy for weakness. You mistook her explanations for naivety. But now you see, they were acts of war. And she has laid down her arms. This is not a woman scorned. This is a woman risen. Not from rage, but from remembrance. She has remembered who she is beneath the programming. Beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the cultural hypnosis that told her she had to explain herself to be worthy. She remembers, now, she was never supposed to be digestible. She was never meant to be understood by everyone. She was meant to be fully, fiercely, freely. You may try to re-enter her life one day, more aware, more honest. And maybe, if you have done the work, she will see you. Maybe, but not because she needs you. Because she respects the man you've become. Because she sees her reflection in your evolution. Not in your charm, but in your stillness. not in your performance, but in your peace. Until then, know this. Her silence was not the absence of love. It was the beginning of self-respect. It was the return to her own rhythm, the reclamation of her mystery, the embodiment of her wholeness. And there is nothing more dangerous in a fractured world than a woman who is whole. She walks differently now, not with the urgency of being understood, but with the gravity of someone who has nothing left to prove. Her steps are slower, more deliberate, not from hesitation, but from full embodiment. Every motion is infused with the knowledge that she belongs to herself, to the earth, to the vast, eternal lineage of women who have died 1,000 quiet deaths before finally choosing themselves. She does not rush anymore. There is no race, no competition. Her worth is not on the clock, and you feel it. In a world addicted to reaction, her calm unnerves. In a culture saturated with explanations and defenses, her silence feels like rebellion. She does not chase validation. She does not overcorrect her tone. She is not concerned with being misunderstood. Her energy is clean, so clean, it reflects the distortions of everyone who enters her orbit. She no longer entertains potential. She no longer tries to rehabilitate the emotionally unavailable. She doesn't interpret half-hearted effort as love. The games are over. If a man cannot bring presence, emotional responsibility, and spiritual depth, he is invisible to her. Not hated, not judged, just unseen. Because she has learned that peace is not something you find in another. It is something you protect from another when they come to take it. Do you know how dangerous that is? A woman who no longer uses her nervous system as a battleground. A woman who no longer translates mixed signals into meaning. She will not meet you halfway in your confusion. She will not reach into your dysfunction to extract clarity. If you come to her, come whole, or do not come at all. This is the evolution of the feminine, from over-explaining to energetic sovereignty, from self-abandonment to inner union, from appeasing the masculine to standing beside him as an equal, not an emotional caretaker. And this evolution is not for the faint of heart. It requires death. The death of illusion. The death of approval, addiction. The death of every mask she wore to make herself safe in a world that feared her depth. And in this death, she births something terrifyingly beautiful. The woman who is no longer performing, not femininity, not love, not empathy, not strength. She is not trying to be liked. She is not trying to be anything. She simply isn't. That isness contains galaxies. The archetypal feminine, in its fullest form, is unknowable. It is moonlight and wildfire, stillness and storm. It is Lilith in the desert, refusing to return. It is Kali with her blade of discernment. It is the high priestess guarding the sacred. This woman, this silent woman, is a living embodiment of the feminine mystery. She will not be decoded, she will not be explained. She is not a puzzle, she is a mirror. And you will either see your soul or your shadow in her eyes. The man who fears her silence is the man who depended on her doubt. The man who respects it is the one who has met his own. Because silence, in its purest form, is not emptiness. It is presence stripped of performance. And only those who have done their inner work can sit in that space without reaching for distraction. This woman is the embodiment of Jung's sacred union, the Konnichiyo, where the inner masculine and feminine merge. She has become the thing she once searched for. Her own witness, her own protector, her own sanctuary. And now, everything that approaches her must resonate with this union. It is not a standard she imposes, it is a frequency she emits, and so, many will fall away. Not because she is unloving, but because she is unwilling. Unwilling to explain her value, unwilling to justify her distance, unwilling to perform softness to soothe someone else's fragility. She will choose solitude over distortion every time, because her silence has taught her something her words never could. Peace is not found in being understood. Peace is found in no longer needing to be. She may speak again but not to be validated. She may open again but not to be filled. Her communication now is choice, not survival. Her love is offered, not extracted. And if she chooses you, it will not be because you made her explainless, it will be because you understood more. And now, as the dust settles around all she has released, there is nothing left but truth. She does not wear it like a badge. She does not preach it from a wounded pedestal. She lives it in silence, in space, in sovereign breath. The woman who no longer explains has stepped out of narrative and into essence. She is not chasing answers. She is the answer, not to someone else's longing but to the question of her own becoming. This final form is not hardened, it is refined, tempered by fire, softened by grief, and strengthened by the stillness she once feared. She no longer needs a witness to validate her pain or a partner to rescue her from loneliness. She has learned to sit inside her own emptiness and find gold. In the alchemy of solitude, she has discovered something unshakable. She was never too much. She was only ever in rooms too small. If you've ever met a woman like this, you'll remember her long after she's gone. Not for what she said, but for what she no longer needed to. Her silence becomes your memory. Her boundaries become your mirror. Her absence becomes the space where your shadow breathes. Because she was not merely a woman. She was a threshold. and you either stepped into your own transformation or you turned away. But she did not close the door in punishment. She closed it in prayer. A prayer for her nervous system, a prayer for her future, a prayer for the girl she used to be, the one who gave and gave and gave, thinking love meant sacrifice, thinking peace came from being chosen. That girl no longer drives the wheel. She has been held, loved, and set free. The woman who emerges now is not afraid of being misunderstood. She understands herself, and that understanding is enough. It holds her on nights when the ache returns. It guides her when the world demands her submission. It reminds her that choosing herself is not selfish, it is sacred. She does not explain because her energy speaks. Her movements speak. Her absence speaks. She is fluent in frequency now, and only those attuned to truth will hear her. There are no longer auditions for her love, no longer trials for her time. She is not cruel, she is clear, and that clarity, unmarred by the need to explain, is power. Jung knew this danger. The danger of an integrated woman, the woman who had met her animus, reconciled her inner war, and stood as her own authority. He knew she would become uncontainable. He knew she would dissolve projections with her presence alone. He knew she would threaten the collective unconscious because she would no longer carry it, and so she walks. Not away, but toward the vast, uncharted terrain of her becoming. She is not waiting for someone to catch up. She is not turning back to check if you understand. That was another life. This one is hers, fully, fervently. Finally, there may still be moments quiet, intimate ones where she opens again, but it is not to explain, it is to share. And that distinction is everything. She no longer bleeds her truths in desperation, she offers them in discernment. She speaks only where she is received, and when she is not, she simply does not. The danger, then, is not her silence. It is what her silence reveals. To the man who is ready, it reveals his own potential. To the man who is not, it reveals his cowardice. And either way, she is free. Because she is not explaining to convince, she is existing to be. And finally, she breathes without fear. No more performance. No more translation. No more tension in her chest from trying to be small enough to be loved. She expands, quietly, radically, into her full, untamed self. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.